Welcome to another Parenting Athletic Kids Essentials podcast. We have Paul Weidner with us again. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
Absolutely. Today we're going to talk about controllables and why focusing on controllables is so valuable, so important. It gets mentioned all the time. Focus on what you can control. So we wanted to dive a little bit deeper into the importance of that, and then maybe talk about a few controllable aspects that you can really dive into with your son or daughter that will help them develop physically, mentally, enjoy the process, all these great things. So, Paul, why don't you kick it off for us? Why is focusing on controllables so important?
I think there's two different ways that I think about this, and both tend to resonate with athletes, and maybe some more than others in one side, and some more than others on the other side of things. When we're focusing on the controllables, because they're controllable, it's more often that we will have success at them if that's what our end goal is. So if we're talking about a controllable of energy and effort, if that's what we are measuring ourselves by during the competition, it's more likely that we will leave that competition feeling like the things that I was measuring myself by that day were I was having success at those things. And then obviously it tends to maybe soften the sting or soften the blow of what the scoreboard or the stat book might have told us is true. So for athletes that do a really poor job of writing a constant up and down of results, focusing on the controllables can help keep them on a steady line. Now, even amongst the controllables, that doesn't mean you will always have success at those, because even, things that we have perfect control over, sometimes we still fall short of, and that's okay. But because they're controllable, we're not wondering if there's something we can do about it. We know there's something we can do about it, right? Which is really comforting and keeps you more on that steady line instead of the roller coaster. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that, and this becomes true, I don't want to say maybe more for younger athletes, because athletes all the way up can try to understand this. Things that are not controllable, when you focus on them, that's mental currency that you're giving to something that you have no control over and can't do anything about. And competitive sports in general, will require enough of your mental energy on things that are controllable that you can't really afford to give it anywhere else if you want to have success. And it's hard. Nobody's going to be perfect at it. But we were talking with really young kids. We talk about giving them $1, so 100 pennies. And we talk about how bad it would be as if I took away 70 of those pennies and you didn't get to buy anything from it. And that's what happens when we focus on uncontrollables, right? They're real things that are happening, but now you only have 30 cents left to try to figure out what you're going to buy with that. So why don't you keep your whole dollar and actually figure out what you can buy with the dollar, is kind of the analogy we use with young athletes. So those are the two routes that I tend to go with that. I'd be curious to know your thoughts on it as well.
My thoughts are those are great. Like that's a foundation. So to hit those, like the first one I think you're talking about is we talk about we're trying to develop intrinsically motivated athletes, and competence is a part of intrinsic motivation. So what consistently drives them, inner drive, over and over again, is competence or mastery of something. And as you said, if we can focus on controllables, we can feel like we're mastering our sport, our development. When we lose focus on that, we give up that currency, as you just spoke of. We have other thoughts that creep in, things that take us down a bad path. We ride the highs and lows much more. So those two are amazing. So to develop intrinsic motivation, we want mastery, competence. Let's focus on controllables. To Paul's point, like we can have an 0-for-4 game, but if we mastered the controllables, if we focused on, and again, like you said, we're not going to necessarily master them, but we can certainly get better and see our progress at them. And progress leads to intrinsic motivation, leads to the desire to want to show up and come back over and over again. So those are fantastic. What else? So anything else other than those two? I love that. That's a great way to kick this off. Mastery and currency. Really like those. What else?
I mean, pretty much anything from there would just be expanding. We can call those a couple of branches, and then there's branches that come off of those branches. But those are the two routes that I really think of, because when we talk about, now let's talk about like some specific examples, right? Which is like a controllable aspect that we would like to have would be the ability to have resiliency when something goes wrong, a bad umpire call, a bad officiating call. And so resiliency is the trait that we're talking about. But when we see that play out, even though it's controllable, doesn't mean we'll always have success at it, because there comes a certain point where, and everybody's line is different. That call was so bad or in such a big situation where now the resiliency of next pitch falters, right? And all we're trying to do when we talk about progress in those areas, just because they're controllable doesn't mean you're instantly good at them. There's still work to be done. So if I'm working with a young athlete or even a high school athlete that maybe is a little bit behind the curve on their resiliency, I'm just looking for examples of like, okay, so something bad happened to you, and did you instantly go to a bad spot, or did you choose next pitch that time? And then as we know, okay, now it's the 7th inning and the bases are loaded. That was their tipping point of like, I can't be resilient anymore. I'm so mad. And so then we try to talk about, okay, so we mastered it up to a certain point. How can we get you to be, because your at bat was over after strike one, it was a call at your ankles, and you needed to be in that at bat and you weren't. So looking for progress in maybe progressively harder situations is kind of the offshoot of how do we differentiate between controllables coming across as being just easy. Like they're not easy. They're just controllable, but that doesn't make them easy. So now we try to find progress in those areas, I guess, is where my mind goes next.
Really cool. Let's dive into, so I think we went through like why it's important. Like it'll be a much steadier state for your athlete if they focus on controls. They will focus on development and mastery and getting better and that intrinsic motivation, and they will eliminate many of the unproductive thoughts that creep into that. So those two things. So that's great. What are the controllables that athletes should focus on and parents can help them focus on?
Yep.
And again, I want parents to be sure of this. If you do this help your son or daughter to do this, they will become the best athlete that they can be. And not only that, they'll have the best mental health and the best, the most fun, the most joy, passion that they can have for the sport. So go back to thinking about that. They're going to love to master the process, their controllables, and they're going to eliminate a bunch of crappy thoughts that pop into their head. Those two things will help them to be passionate about the sport. So what should athletes focus on and parents can help them focus on as far as these controllables? And then we'll start to see parents, man, if my son or daughter really does these things, they're going to maximize their potential.
Yeah. Yep.
What are those things that they should focus on?
From a broad standpoint, and it's energy, effort, and engagement for me. And that's not because it's catchy and they all three start with the letter E. I just think it's like, because you can go different places with all three of those words. So energy, effort, and engagement. Those are the three that I think about right offhand. Energy, in a lot of senses, we do think of energy as the amount of physical energy, almost like from a hyper standpoint, that we bring to the table. And that's not wrong. Nobody wants to show up to the field at 8 a.m. at a tournament, or the court at 8 a.m. at a tournament and have like lethargic. So in some cases, it absolutely is energy. But we also understand that there are people that have energy and they direct it to the wrong places. So the resiliency of like focusing and putting your mental currency into where it belongs, that's also another way of saying, where does your energy belong? So your energy belongs on what the pitcher's trying to do to you, not the strike one call that was a ball. And I know we keep coming back to that example, but hopefully it's just an easy one to understand. So like energy is like, yes, energy, but also energy, like where are you directing that energy? Effort's a really big one too. Effort seems like such a given and it's so easy to understand. But again, when we tie in resiliency to that, we all know that whether the scoreboard is telling us or whether the stat book is kicking us down, or maybe we're on the right side of that to the extreme where we're kind of blowing out a team, does your effort, which is what you should be focusing on, waver based on circumstance, or is effort there because it should be, and that's part of my process? So effort, again, super easy to just think about, but there's intricacies to that of like, yeah, in all situations, or no, it's got to be pretty much all the time, you know. And then engagement, the social aspect of sports, not just for making friends and all that stuff, but you will get so much more out of your experience when you understand that engaging with the people you're sharing it with is a huge deal. So the coaches that are trying to coach you and make you better, are you giving them the engagement that they deserve? Your teammates, are you engaging with them in a way that gives them good energy and gives them good leadership from you, whether it's lateral leadership or leadership coming from top to bottom? Those things are just really important. So effort, energy, and engagement, energy, effort, and engagement, and then kind of whatever offshoots we can come up with on that, I think are where I begin.
So what would the offshoots be? So I'm just trying to picture, you know, my son out on the field, and I'm kind of trying to watch them and think about if they're focusing on the controllables here. They look like they have great energy. The effort is there. And they're engaged with their teammates. They're engaged with their coaches.
Yep.
Is that it? Or so to your point, they strike out. Do they still have a high level of engagement, and do they run back out on the field, and is their energy good? I mean, to me, it's that simple. Like if you see your son or daughter and they can stay, they can maintain a good level of energy and effort and engagement throughout a game, they're focusing on the right things, and they're able to respond to adversity, be resilient, overcome obstacles, and if good things happen, you know, on the flip side of it, do they still have that same energy, effort, engagement, even when things are going really well? Or do they get too high and lose those things? So what else? Is there anything else that a parent can be keen on, focused on, or help or talk to their son or daughter about? Like, I think we can go down a really, you know, to your point, like take one of these and go really in a big time direction with it. And, you know, but I think it is maybe just as simple as focusing on those three things. Your thoughts?
I do think it is really that simple. And we keep coming back to the word resiliency, almost to so much importance that it might deserve its own, you know, kind of category, but all of this plays into resiliency. And I always try to kind of live in the reality of what competitive sports will bring to you, which is it will knock you down. There will be bad calls. You will fail. And the reality is that your immediate reaction, as long as you care and are being competitive with it, is that you will have a dip in the way that you feel, I guess, for lack of a better word. The analogy I always use is like you're going along this line and some event happens and it doesn't go the way you wanted to. So you dip below the line, and the line would be like your ideal state. You got to understand that every single athlete will have that happen to them. What we're after when it comes to mental performance is trying to limit the depth and the length of time in which they stay below that line. And so if something bad does happen to them and it's strike one of an at bat, you can't really afford to have yourself stay below that line for the rest of the at bat, because the next pitch is coming probably 15 seconds later, right? So like that's got to happen so fast. But when we're talking about energy, effort, and engagement, those are things that can help with limiting the depth of how far below that line you go and the length of time that it happens. And so the reason why we focus on those is because it does help turn that corner and get us back up to the line that we want to be at when we're competing in as many events during the game as we possibly can. So it's just another way of saying resiliency. That turning the line or turning the corner and going back upwards towards the line are massively helped by a focus on the controllables, which is energy, effort, and engagement. And that's why it really is just those three. And then after that, it's just examples and maybe like, well, I worded it this way or this way, but like those are all whatever. those three, and you're going to be in a great spot. I'd love to know if you can think of any other ones that you'd like to go with. But I think it is, for me, it's just that. That's what it is.
No, I mean, again, I think you could get into, physical controllables, pregame stuff that the athlete's gonna work through and makes them feel more comfortable in the game, in-game physical things that they do or don't do, mental things that they do or don't do, all things that we'll continue to talk about, throughout these podcasts, positive self-talk, all these things. But I think for a parent, if you can just ask your son or daughter to lean into these three things, as you go into the game today, have really good energy, really good effort, really good engagement, and then asking them afterwards, how did they do on these things? And you can kind of read body language and possibly tell as a parent, but I wouldn't want the parent to start the conversation and say, hey, I saw this. No, let's let them take the lead on this. Just ask them, how was their effort, energy, engagement? And then if they have holes in it, then we can talk about, well, I did get that strike three call and my energy went really down. I was really frustrated. Okay. How can you respond better in that situation? How can you maintain a certain level of energy and engagement after that? These are fantastic conversations, parents, that you can have with your son or daughter that they probably aren't having, getting with their coaches and with their teammates and on the field stuff, where generally it comes more down to skill acquisition and those kinds of things. So you can help be a mental performance coach on this, on just focusing on these three things. Again, there's branches to that tree that we could go down, but as parents, you're walking through this with your son or daughter, just keep it that simple, and they will learn and become autonomous through this process and figure out where the holes are in their process, where they lose focus on controllables. Maybe we can go into that a little bit more. What things generally do take people away from this? I think it's easy in sports, like the focus becomes on how many hits we get, how many points we score. And we don't have to necessarily get at that, but let's do it a little bit. Like the damage that can be caused from that is, now if that's the goal and I don't get hits or I don't score points, then all these terrible thoughts come into my head and I lose energy, engagement, and effort, right? So parents, again, if you can steer your sons and daughters away from those uncontrollable things that will affect their development, their autonomy, their intrinsic motivation, and get them back to these controllables. I kind of went on a rampage there. Help me solidify these thoughts, Paul. Like, where did that take you?
Yeah, anything that takes them out of the controllables, and I kind of use it with another analogy of the importance of being in the present moment. Most of the time, things that take their focus away from the things that are important, which is what's happening right here, right now, and your controllables, is frustrations about the past or fears about the future. So frustrations about the past would be a bad call. I struck out last at bat. I just made an error. I missed a shot, whatever that may be. And then fears about the future is something we haven't talked too much about because a lot of it tends to be reactionary. But we all know, too, that we're no longer focusing on the right things when we're wondering what will happen if I strike out, what will happen, what are the consequences, and we're very fearful of what that might look like in the future. So both of those can be true. They're all results-based things, and I really, learning a little bit more about us, like I'm not somebody that likes to live in the reality or live outside of the reality that results in sports don't matter. Like, they do, because that's why we play them, and that's part of having a competitive spirit, is that we want the results to be their team and individual both. However, if we're talking about the process of getting to those results and how do we put ourselves in the best position for that, it's a continued focus on the controllables because we're looking for that to help give us the results that we're looking for. And Trav, you talked about this when you were just talking there, that I think is important. I always try to tell the athletes that I'm working with, anything that I try to instill in you is with the end goal in mind of making you a better athlete or a better baseball player, basketball player, football player, whatever that might be. None of that is to make you, oh, it's nice and I just want you to have fun. Like, this is all with the goal in mind of having you perform better, or at least putting yourself in the position to perform better. So parents, if you're struggling with that conversation with your kid because they just want to talk about the hits and the scoreboard and all that stuff, use that to your advantage to say, this is the process of getting you there, and here's why, which is what this episode is about. Like, why are we focusing on the controllables? Make no mistake about it. Focusing on the controllables will put you in a better position to have the success that you're looking for. You're just looking at the end result, and you as a parent are trying to pull them into the process of helping them with that end result. Super, super important. And I don't want to have that not be said in a podcast like this, that like it is helping you with those results that we all ultimately want if we're playing competitive sports.
Yeah, and along that way too, it will help them to stay passionate about it. So the result is definitely important. We understand that, but the passion to drive them to the result is also important. And that passion can get off the tracks if they're focused on uncontrollables. I think it's easy for us to see that the energy, effort, engagement will lead to the best result. It's harder for parents and athletes to see that and to focus on that over and over again. And what it looks like isn't a cookie cutter thing, parents. So if the result isn't what the athlete wants, can controllable things be adjusted to help get a better result? So maybe the energy isn't there all the time. Maybe the energy isn't there at practice. Maybe the energy isn't there at pregame. Maybe we're not getting enough sleep to have good energy and effort and engagement. These other things can go into that. But if they show up and are focused on these things, then the result, you can go back to the process and say, does something need to be changed in the process? Does something need to be changed in our energy, effort, engagement? So it's not just, to Paul's point, like go out there and do these things and it'll be fun and everything, rah, rah. No, these things can be taken down different paths. Yep. But I can't think of anything else like I've got 2 Division I athletes as sons. And again, there's different branches of this tree, but if they feel like they show up with great energy, effort, engagement day after day, I think that they will think that they're giving themselves the best chance of success, getting hits, winning games, throwing strikes, whatever it will be. And there's details to that go within that. But if I asked them after games, how was your energy, effort, and engagement? And they said it was awesome, let's go. Yep. Again, if they said, I lost it here and there, this is what happened. All right, let's talk about that. How can we stay more consistent? How can we maintain that line, as Paul talks about, not dipping too far below, not going too far above that line? Awesome. So anything else you'd add to this?
No, I thought that was great. And hopefully, it's concise enough to just understand, like this is what it is, and not to make it seem easy, but make it seem easy to understand of what it is that we're looking for. And then also, I really like, Trav, that you mentioned both your boys are playing Division I college baseball at a very high level. And this doesn't stop because they graduated from Little League to high school. And now it's about the other things. Like, this is all the way up. So just know that that's true too, as kind of, church leaguey as that can seem, of just like energy, effort, and engagement. We're talking about high-level Division I athletes that is what they should be focusing on. So if it's not above them, it is most likely not above your son or daughter that you're listening to on this podcast.
For sure. Really good point. And what happens is the higher they go, the harder that gets to stay in those three things, to stay in that realm. There's more distractions. There's less hits. There's less success. At the younger levels, there's more success, and it's not as focused on success and results. So it gets harder and harder. So if you can keep pounding that rock as they do go up, and keep asking them, how's your energy? How's your effort? How's your engagement? And they can say wherever it is. But again, that gets harder. So I just did a podcast with Will, with my older son, and he talks about his sophomore year in college, how he lost a lot of that. He got focused on the results. He got focused on the wrong things, and he lost his energy, effort, engagement at different levels in those different things, and how he had to circle back to those, and we won't get into all that, how he kind of regained that, but understanding that and helping your athlete to focus on that, always be focused on that. And that's all we're focused on. And parents will help them to regain that faster, and stay consistent in those three areas. So really good. So just to summarize, we'll wrap this baby up. Paul, I think we talked really well about, here's why it's important. Just to simplify that, it will help your son or daughter be the best player they can be and stay the most passionate about their sport if they're focused on controllables. And how we can help them do that is to focus on energy, effort, engagement, talk about it before games, practices, when they're going to the weight room, anytime. This is just the conversation that we always have. After the games, ask them how they did in those three areas, and then have great conversations about maybe making adjustments or maybe not. Things are really good. All right. Anything to cap this one off, Paul?
No, sir. It was good.
Awesome. So parents, thanks again so much for tuning in. Hope this podcast helped. If you have specific questions for Paul or myself that we can answer, please feel free to email me at mindrighttraining@gmail.com or put your comments in the podcast link, and we'll get to those as much as we can. Thanks again, Paul, and we'll see you again real soon.
Thank you. See you soon.
Thank you for tuning into the podcast. Please be sure to like, follow, and especially share the podcast. If you want more information on strategies that you can use to help optimize your son or daughter's athletic experience, please check out my book, Parenting Athletic Kids. It's available on Amazon. Thanks again, and we'll be back with another podcast really soon.